If you went to school in 1960s America, stay with this video until the end. What you're about to hear isn't exaggeration, and it isn't nostalgia smoothing things over. School in the 1960s was a completely different world. Not just different from today, but different in how it felt to walk through the doors each morning. It was formal. It was strict. It was serious. And for most of the decade, nobody questioned it. This was the last era of old-style American schooling. Before open classrooms. Before casual dress. Before calculators, computers, and flexible rules. School still ran the way it had for generations. Authority was absolute. Discipline came first. Learning meant listening, memorizing, and obeying. Creativity and self-expression were not priorities. Let's step into that world and walk through what school was really like in 1960s America. Walking into a world of rules and order. The moment you arrived at school, you felt it. The building itself demanded seriousness. Long hallways, hard floors, echoing footsteps, classrooms that all looked the same, rows of desks, a blackboard at the front, a teacher's desk that you did not touch. There was no casual energy, no lounging, no noise. You knew you were expected to behave the second you stepped inside. Running in the halls was forbidden. Talking loudly was not allowed. You walked, you lined up, and you waited. Every movement had rules. Where to sit, when to speak, how to address adults. You didn't question these things. You followed them because that's how school worked. 2. Dress codes were strict and unwritten. What you wore mattered. A lot. Boys wore slacks, button-down shirts, and leather shoes. Jeans were not allowed. T-shirts were not allowed. Sneakers were for gym class only. Hair had to be short and neat. Long hair on boys was unacceptable. Facial hair was out of the question. Girls wore dresses or skirts. Pants were not permitted. Skirts had to reach the knee or lower. No tight clothing. No low necklines. Hair was styled carefully, often sprayed into place. Makeup, if allowed at all, was minimal and natural. Most schools didn't even need to write the dress code down. Everyone knew it. If you broke it, you were sent home. Some principals stood at the entrance checking clothing before students were allowed inside. The message was clear. School was not casual. It was serious business. 3. The day began with the Pledge of Allegiance. Every morning started the same way. Everyone stood. Chairs scraped the floor as students rose together. You faced the flag, hand over heart, and you recited the Pledge of Allegiance out loud in unison. Silence followed. No joking. No whispering. This was not optional. It was a daily ritual that reinforced respect, patriotism, and order. After the pledge came announcements over the intercom. The principal or a student read them slowly. Everyone listened. Talking during announcements meant trouble. School was structured down to the minute, and mornings set the tone for the entire day. The classroom layout never changed. Classrooms were arranged for control. Desks were lined up in straight rows, all facing the front. You sat in an assigned seat and stayed there. The desks were heavy, made of wood or metal with attached chairs. Many still had inkwell holes left over from earlier decades. The desktop lifted up for storage. Your books, notebooks, and pencils lived inside. The desks were scratched with initials and names from students who had sat there years before you. Everything in the room pointed toward the teacher. The blackboard. The desk. The authority. 5. Teachers were authority figures, not friends. Teachers commanded respect. You addressed them as Mr., Miss, or Mrs. Never by first name. When a teacher entered the room, students stood. You sat only when told. You raised your hand and waited to be called on before speaking. Talking out of turn was unacceptable. Teachers dressed formally. Male teachers wore suits or sport coats with ties. Female teachers wore dresses or skirts with blouses. Their appearance reinforced their authority. Teachers were not warm companions. They were leaders. They controlled the classroom completely, and students were expected to comply without question. 6. Learning meant listening and memorizing. Teaching in the 1960s was direct and rigid. The teacher spoke. You listened. You took notes. That was learning. Lessons were delivered through lectures. Students copied information from the blackboard into notebooks. Memorization was the goal. You learned facts, formulas, dates, and definitions, then repeated them on tests. Math was repetition, drill after drill. Times tables were memorized by chanting them out loud as a class. Speed and accuracy mattered more than understanding why something worked. If you missed something, the teacher did not slow down. You asked a classmate later or fell behind. 7. Chalkboards were the center of everything. The blackboard was essential. Teachers wrote everything in chalk. Problems, notes, assignments. Students copied everything by hand. Your notebook was your textbook. Chalk dust filled the air. Erasers were thick felt or wooden blocks. Students were sometimes chosen to clean them by banging them together outside. Chalk dust covered your hands and clothes, and nobody thought twice about it. Returning to class with white hands was normal. 8. Handwriting was taught and judged. Penmanship mattered a lot. Students spent hours practicing cursive writing. The Palmer method was standard. Each letter had to be formed correctly. Neatness was graded. If your handwriting was sloppy, you rewrote the assignment. Many schools did not allow ballpoint pens. Students used pencils or fountain pens filled from ink bottles. Ink stains on fingers, clothes, and papers were common. Good handwriting was considered a sign of discipline and character. 9. Discipline was physical and accepted. Corporal punishment was normal. If you misbehaved, you were paddled. The paddle was made of wood, sometimes with holes drilled into it. Punishment might happen in front of the class or in the principal's office. Getting paddled at school usually meant more punishment at home. Parents supported the school. There was no arguing. Physical discipline was seen as effective and necessary. Fear was part of the system, and it worked. 10. Silence and control defined the school day. Libraries were silent. Absolute silence. The librarian enforced it strictly. Talking meant removal or punishment. Books were checked out using cards. Due dates were stamped. Research meant using card catalogs and learning the Dewey Decimal System. Finding information required patience and effort. There were no shortcuts. No technology to help you. Just books, cards, and quiet concentration. 11. The cafeteria was about rules, not choice. Lunch in the 1960s was not a social free-for-all. It was structured and controlled. Students lined up by class or grade. You carried a tray and moved through the serving line quietly. Talking loudly was not allowed. The food was simple and uniform. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, canned vegetables, bread, and milk. Everything was cooked in large batches. The meals looked the same every day. Portions were fixed. You ate what you were served. The clean plate rule was enforced. Wasting food was unacceptable. If you didn't finish your meal, you might not get dessert. Cafeteria monitors walked the room watching for problems. They made sure students stayed seated and behaved properly. Some students brought lunch from home. Metal lunch boxes were common, often decorated with cowboys, astronauts, or cartoon characters. Trading food was normal, but it had to be done quietly. Lunch was a break from class, but it was still school. Rules never disappeared. 12. Recess meant going outside no matter what. Recess happened every day, and it almost always meant going outside. Unless it was raining hard, students were sent out regardless of the temperature. Cold, wind, or heat didn't matter. Playgrounds were made of metal and concrete. Slides, monkey bars, swings, and seesaws sat on asphalt or packed dirt. There were no soft surfaces. Falls were common. Scraped knees and bruises were expected. Adults did not organize games. Kids handled that themselves. Kickball, dodgeball, tag, foursquare, and jump rope filled the playground. Rules were decided on the spot. Arguments were settled by the kids, not teachers. Supervision existed, but it was minimal. The recess monitor watched for serious trouble only. Fighting that got too rough might stop play, but minor injuries were ignored. Learning to handle yourself was part of growing up. 13. Physical education was serious and separate. Physical education was mandatory and taken seriously. Boys and girls were separated. This was unquestioned. Boys focused on sports, fitness drills, and strength. Calisthenics were common. Push-ups, sit-ups, running laps, and fitness tests were routine. Competition was encouraged. Girls did different activities. Dance, light gymnastics, and exercises considered more appropriate at the time. The expectations were lower, and no one questioned why. Students changed into uniforms. Shorts and shirts with last names stenciled on them were common. After class, students showered. The showers were communal. Privacy did not exist. This was considered normal and expected. Skipping physical education was not allowed. Complaints were ignored. Physical fitness was part of discipline. 14. The principal was feared. The principal was not a friendly figure. The principal represented authority at its highest level inside the school. Being sent to the principal's office was serious. It meant trouble. The principal could paddle you, suspend you, or call your parents. Students avoided the office at all costs. Principals walked the halls looking for rule violations. Students caught wandering without permission needed a hall pass. Without one, you were questioned immediately. The hierarchy was clear. Teachers answered to the principal. Students answered to everyone. 15. Hall passes controlled movement. You did not move freely in school. Leaving the classroom required permission. A hall pass had to be written and carried. If you were in the hall during class time without a pass, you were stopped. Questions were asked. Punishment was possible. This system reinforced control. School was not a place where you wandered. You stayed where you were assigned. 16. Tests were handwritten and strict. Testing in the 1960s was serious business. Tests were written by hand on paper. Multiple choice, fill in the blank, and essay questions were common. There were no calculators. All math work had to be done by hand. Showing your work mattered. Accuracy mattered. Cheating was difficult and risky. Copying meant physically trying to see another student's paper. Getting caught meant automatic failure and often punishment. Fear of consequences kept most students in line. 17. Report cards carried real weight. Grades mattered. Report cards were issued periodically and sent home. Letter grades were used. A meant excellent. C meant average. D meant you were failing. There was no grade inflation. Many students received poor grades. Expectations were high. Parents had to sign report cards and return them. Bad grades usually meant consequences at home. School and parents worked together. There was no arguing grades or blaming teachers. 18. Science was demonstration, not discovery. Science class was textbook-based. The teacher explained concepts. Students took notes. Experiments were mostly demonstrations performed by the teacher. Hands-on student experiments were rare. Preserved animals filled science rooms. Frogs, fetal pigs, insects in jars. The smell of preservation chemicals was unforgettable. Dissections happened in advanced classes. Cutting open a frog was considered normal education, not controversial. 19. History and civics taught patriotism. History focused on memorization. Dates, names, wars, and presidents were emphasized. America was presented as heroic and exceptional. The founding fathers were celebrated. Wars were justified. Critical examination was minimal. Civics stressed duty, obedience, and national pride. Questioning the narrative was not encouraged. 20. Silence and conformity were expected. Across all subjects, silence was valued. Order mattered. Questioning authority was rare. School in the 1960s trained students to follow rules, respect hierarchy, and accept structure. If you went to school in the 1960s, these moments weren't history lessons. They were your everyday life. And if even one of these memories felt familiar, share it in the comments. Tell us what school was really like for you, what you remember most clearly, or what felt the strictest. Your experiences matter, and they help keep this part of history alive. If you want more stories like this, support the video so we can continue exploring life as it really was.